Nick Taylor. According to some people over here, he's a traitor. I don't get that part, but he's going to talk to us about malware analysis for busy people. So please give him a hand.
Okay, so it's a bit different than what is in the paper, but my talk today is malware analysis for busy people, so it's malware automation, plus as well just malware analysis for people who don't like to do things. So a bit about me. I'm an internal security analyst with Shopify out of Ottawa. I was previously working with TELUS, hence being a traitor to a select group of people over there. I am a malware enthusiast. I don't deal with it so much in my day-to-day job now, but I do enjoy playing with malware. It's one of those things that I've always enjoyed taking apart. It's nice because you don't have to do anything to put it back together. And I hate doing boring things, which I imagine probably most of you do, but I try and make those boring things go away as best as I can. So this is my attempt at sharing those endeavors with you. So that's who am I and who are you? So to get the most out of this talk, this is more targeted towards people who are analysts in any of these categories, in anything with some sort of letters in an order. An analyst or consultant, something like that. Basically doing any sort of incident response or looking at malware. So if you ever come across malware and have to do any sort of response to that, you'd probably be interested, as well as anyone who's in IT support who may be doing more malware stuff. You don't have a dedicated security team, or people like me who just like tinkering with malware. So the first step to analyzing malware is getting the malware. It's a pretty easy step. If the users can figure it out, so can we. The next step is understanding the malware that you have. What does it do? Things like that. And then what does that do in your specific environment, or what does it do in things that you care about? Because I don't care if this is Russian-targeted malware. If it doesn't work on my machines, if it just exits, it doesn't do anything, then really it doesn't affect me. Then you have to do something about it. Now, this is not really the scope of my talk, but you're going to need to do something when you find malware on some machine. And then the step 0 that you should be doing before everything is automating it. But first you have to kind of understand what you need before you can do any of that. So getting malware. There are tons and tons of ways to get malware. You can get it from a very old mail program that I found on Wikipedia. One of the more common ways people are still getting lots of malware is just phishing. People click on documents, click on random JavaScript files, click on pretty much everything that you can think of because they want to win that free cruise or get that deal on some shoes or something. Other thing is you got drive-by downloads and scummy antivirus stuff and pop-ups, and if you are running some older stuff, some actual exploits and exploit kits. That's one way to get malware. And no matter what protections that you do have in place, the users will figure out a way to bypass that and run it anyways. So you can't really rely on having the latest and greatest next generation antivirus and endpoint protection and all that stuff. They will figure out a way to actually get it to run despite all of your efforts. So now that you have malware, the tough part is really understanding what that malware does. It's pretty easy to tell, okay, this thing's bad. In some cases it's not easy, but a lot of the time it's pretty easy to tell, okay, this is a crypto locker. If I run it, my system encrypts and I have to pay them some bitcoins and stuff. But aside from that, aside from the very top level stuff, this is where a lot of people I find kind of don't go any deeper. So you end up, you know what it does on a very vague scale, but you don't know anything else, and then you're like, okay, let's just nuke this machine, get them a new one, and they'll be in next week with it again. And you also don't necessarily know what to be looking out for. So typically what I'm looking for when I do any sort of malware analysis, network indicators. So you have a whole ton of, most malware nowadays is networked in some capability. So you'll be looking for command and control servers, so domains or IP addresses, ports, things like that. Most now run over HTTP, so you're not getting a lot of weird ports being blocked by your firewall, and that stops things. So it's pretty standard. Some stuff does run off other things, but a lot of the time those are, if someone's got something really, really old on their machine. File indicators. So when you're playing with malware, you want to understand what file indicators you have that you can maybe look for on other machines. So does it drop a certain executable in a certain directory that maybe you can check, okay, is there anything else on the network that has that? Does it, drop any file called data.zip? Okay, that's something that's interesting. And the target. Is this targeted specifically at me or my organization, or is this targeted at anyone who decides to click on an ad on some sketchy site somewhere? So typically, these are the things that I'm finding. And again, a target, if it's specific to your organization, that's sort of the same question. These are the things I found that I usually cared about, at least at the very outset. As you delve deeper and deeper into the analysis, you get more specific questions. But usually what you want to know falls into the realm of one of these. So this is VirusTotal. I assume everyone in here has at one point used VirusTotal. But if you haven't, it's a sort of an antivirus aggregation tool. It pulls a whole bunch of antiviruses together to be able to give you an idea of whether a file is good or bad, because it's better to trust 70 antiviruses than the one you have. But as you can see, maybe you can see, this doesn't give you a lot of information. A lot of things think it's bad, but it's, generic Trojan or generic, KD, stuff like that. So it really doesn't give you a lot of information about what it actually does. It's just like, this is bad. We don't know what it is, but we think it's bad. Sometimes you get a bit better information. Again, for those who can see, there's some things that actually tell you. So this is actually a sample of Locky, so you can see there's some things that say Locky in some different places. A lot of them still say generic, and some of them actually say the wrong kinds of malware. So there's Tesla Crypt, Yakes, there's a couple other in there that I saw before. So you don't want to trust any individual source. Even trusting a whole slew of sources, you can be pretty sure that this is Locky, but you can't be certain. So basically, if you have some sort of endpoint antivirus and it triggers off something and it says, hey, you've got, Locky, that might be true, it might not be true. So sort of take that with a grain of salt, since that's not really what they're designed to do. They're basically just there as a good or bad indicator. So really, this is the only thing I typically find particularly useful about VirusTotal, aside from the initial, is this good or bad, is when VirusTotal has seen this. Because VirusTotal is a very common tool. Almost everybody, I'd say, in the security industry uses it, and lots of consumers use it as well. So it can give you a really good idea of how old a piece of malware is. So in this case, you can actually see the creation time. I'm guessing that is faked. It would make no sense for Locky to be from 2005. But you can see the first submission. So that's probably the most important bit that I look for. So this means that in the general world out there, the first time someone saw this was probably around February 16th of 2016. So with that information, right now, if you were to get this, you can kind of answer some of those questions. So is this targeted towards, your organization? Probably not, because if they are, this is really old and they submitted it a while ago and also sent it to 100 other people. It doesn't make any sense. So, that indicates to me that it's something more commodity, something that is, spread to everyone. It also lets me know that since this is older, in the scheme of how fast malware seems to be evolving, you're probably not going to see anything super surprising. This isn't going to be something leveraging any sort of 0 days or new techniques that might be in the news. This is stuff that is like, okay, it's some sort of, CryptoLocker, Tesla Crypt, something like that, ransomware. So you're not going to be too surprised by anything. The next step I kind of go to in terms of intelligence is there's a whole bunch of open intelligence feeds. One that I like a lot is OTX, which is from Alien Vault, which is a SIM vendor. They do threat intelligence, stuff like that. They're open, so that's good and bad, and one that you don't have to pay for it. But two is that no one else has to pay for it, and they can submit whatever they want. So it's almost like a Google for threat intelligence. You basically have to take everything with a grain of salt. But it is a great place to start since it does list a lot of information. And if it's part of a larger, what they call, I can't remember what they call it now, but basically a larger incident that they're calling it. A lot of the times these are actually from specific vendors or specific security researchers that have sort of curated this list. So this particular one, I doubt anyone can see it, but it's from Palo Alto Networks. So this is their sort of alert they sent out to Alien Vault OTX saying, this is Locky, this is some information we have on it. So what you're able to see from this particular one is a whole bunch of hashes. I think there was like 256 different hashes in here. So if you were to go to OTX and paste this, the hash of the file in, we're able to see this and okay, it's Locky, these are the rest that I'm looking for. So if you're concerned about a particular outbreak where there may be some variants that are going around that aren't just the single one that you're looking at, you can pull these all down, and if you have the capability to search across your network and say, hey, is there any files on any computers that match all of these hashes or any of these hashes, alert me. So it's good for that. This one in particular didn't have much network information. Just had the one domain, but I believe, oh no, I didn't put it in. A lot of times they do have a lot more domains and IP addresses, and sometimes even URIs that have actual regular expressions to sort of tell you what the format of the command and control is. So you can use a lot of information. For Locky, there was about 50 or 60 different threat feeds, all with some slightly different information. But what I actually find can be more useful is to just search the hash that you're looking for on Google. Because if you're able to Google it and you're able to find a reputable source, a lot of the times you're able to find a lot more in-depth information than you're going to get out of the OTX information. You're going to get something from Cisco or something from any of the other vendors out there, something from Palo Alto, giving a detailed explanation of what it is, and a lot of times a detailed breakdown of how it works, which can be very useful to determining your next steps. The next step is to put it into one of the automated malware running and dynamic analysis tools. There's a whole bunch of them. There's Cuckoo, which is self-hosted and open source. What it basically does is it's a management tool to run a whole bunch of virtual machines that you can throw malware on, and it has some reporting to tell you what happened. So you're able to see sort of what this malware actually did without having to run it on a machine and then re-image your own machine. There's also a whole bunch of commercial tools. I would recommend, if you have the money, going for the commercial tools unless you really like playing around with stuff, because Cuckoo, to get set up properly, can take a long time and a lot of effort, since there's a lot of anti-virtual machine and virtual machine detection techniques out there. It's very hard to get it to the point where it's going to match any of the commercial tools, because they have people working a long time doing this every day. So there's vExtreme Sandbox or Payload Security. They have a free version called, I think it's reverse.it, that you can do. Almost all of the commercial ones have a free version that you can play around with. That just gives you some information. There's Joe Sandbox, similar tool. Palo Alto Wildfire. That one's actually built into a whole lot of their services. So they have an endpoint tool that hooks into that. A lot of their firewalls will send all of your malware or all of the downloads for this, or a select subset. So you're able to do dynamic analysis on the fly without having to necessarily do it yourself. So these give output like this. So this is from the vExtreme Payload Security / Reverse It one. I think this was from the Reverse It one online. So again, I don't think people will really be able to see it, but you can see at the top there's a process listing. So you can kind of see what it's doing. It's using scheduled tasks and creating a task, and it's executing Explorer. So if you're someone who knows a bit more about how malware works, that's a bit more interesting. But the thing that I find is really useful for people who are maybe using this once a week or once a month or something like that, is it gives you a sort of why we think this is malicious. Why do we think that this is something that you would not want running? So this is for that Locky sample, so it's particularly old. So not the best characterization of something you might see on day 1 or day 2 of a new piece of malware. But you can see that it was detected by a large number of antiviruses, detected by the emerging threats alerts, as well as it can see some individual things like it's scheduling tasks and scanning for the taskbar and injecting into the taskbar. So you can see what it's doing and sort of go from there and say, okay, this is definitely malicious. It really helps when it's a particular piece of malware that you're looking at day one and say, someone's downloading this. This could be completely legitimate. It's from some, partner, but, we don't know for sure. Is this malicious? Because it's not picking up on any AV as either definitely good or definitely bad. It also gives you network information. So again, for this particular thing with Locky, it gives you two, domain-generated, randomized sort of domains there, pointing to some Chinese IPs. So if that does not set off red flags, it gives you a good information. So now, if you want, you can now look at if you have any sort of logging on your network side. Who else on my network has hit any of these IPs or any of these hosts, or set up alerts or blocks on those? So now you can move from just having one sample that you either got, through an email from someone saying, hey, I got this email, check out this attachment, it looks sketchy, or you found someone who got infected with this. And now you blow this up on here and you can see, okay, this is what we got. For Locky, the biggest indicator is the fact that they're calling you saying, my computer says I have to pay it money. But if it's something else that's a bit more stealthy, a bit more APT or meaning to be on there long term, you can turn up a lot of stuff. So once you know what the malware does, you really need to understand what it does in your environment and why you would care about it. If it's just Locky, if you have good backups, stuff like that, if it's not doing any sort of internal spreading, you don't really care. Someone clicked on something, they downloaded it. Maybe if you had a better endpoint, a better whatever, whole list of things, it wouldn't have happened, but it did. And now you re-image the machine, download the last update or the last backup, and you don't really care. So you care in the sense that it's obviously causing disruption, but aside from that, you're not really, it's not really a big threat. It's more of a nuisance or an annoyance. Love this quote. I saw it just about a week ago. There's a lot of non-standard settings that you can do that will really mess with malware. So in my personal experience, I know that if you have a global proxy set and you kill off all of the other traffic, a lot of malware will not run because it does not detect proxy settings. It will try and directly connect to whatever IP, and then if it can't, it doesn't. Which is good and bad because it can sort of make you a bit complacent, especially if you have people who take their devices home or if you have a lot of people who work from home. If they're on VPN or in the office with this device, it gets infected and it gets dropped right by the proxy settings because the firewall drops everything else. You might not necessarily realize that an infection has occurred because everything's been dropped, nothing happens, but it keeps trying, and it keeps trying to reach whatever server is trying to reach. And then as soon as whoever clicked on it goes home, they load it up on their home network, they don't have VPN or they haven't started it up yet. Now it actually gets a foothold, and that is all outside of your control at that point. If all you know is the sort of initial installation indicators, you're going to have a really hard time going on from that because they're going to come back in the next Monday or the next week or whatever, still infected, but they won't be triggering any of those things that we saw earlier. They might be, but they might not be. So really what I find that I look for in relation to malware and the environments I'm looking at is payload completion. Does it actually run in my environment? That could be down to antivirus. Does your antivirus detect it? Does it detect it at different stages? So you want to be able to search your antivirus or endpoint solution to say, okay, if I have something with this hash running, will it get stopped? Or has it been stopped previously? Will it trigger any of the security systems that I have in place? If someone were to go to that domain or IP address I showed earlier, is that already in a list somewhere where that would have been blocked and would have sent an alert? Because that saves a lot of time. If it's already in there, then you don't have to do it. And lateral movement. This isn't necessarily lateral movement, but I couldn't really figure out a way to say this. but does it touch other systems on your network, and how? So if it's some sort of ransomware, is it going to try and connect to network shares? And if it is, how is it going to try that? Is it going to enumerate every single network share that it can through SMB? Or is it just going to do the ones that it's already connected to? Is it going to search through your entire, every single private subnet that it can touch to try and exploit something? Or is it just going to do specific ones or try and pull it out of the network card? So there's lots of information that it's going to be hard to sort of understand in relation to the malware, because it really affects how you're going to mitigate it on your side. Because if you're not seeing it the exact same way as you're expecting it to, you're not going to see it, and you're not going to be able to actually determine that that's running, because you're going to be looking somewhere else completely. So now what? So you have some malware, you're like, yeah, this is awful. Someone's got CryptoLocker on their machine. What do you do? And so that's a little outside of the scope of this talk, but there's lots of options, so I figured I should cover them. The most common ones you're going to get are, just reimage the machine, just run some sort of remediation tool like Malwarebytes, something like that. But if it's particularly bad, this could be a completely legitimate response. If you're in one of the places that, actually this one I think, if you're Becca's, however you say that, I can never say it. If you're them and you're getting hit by NotPetya a couple months ago, it would be a completely legitimate response for them to just start shutting off the network to prevent this from getting anywhere further. And that probably would have saved them a ton of money if they had done that. So really, it's more of you need to understand what your response should be. If it's something that is, a worm or whatever, and it's actually spreading within your network, you don't want to have to be the guy who's calling up, to the CEO or the CTO or whatever saying, hey, are we allowed to actually just shut everything off? You should have that sort of in place. At what point do you say, okay, this is bad, everything gets shut down? And, basically, you don't want to be these guys. You don't want to be, I don't know if they use malware in this, but it was, when I Googled news things, this came up. You don't want to be the guys who are in the news because something happens. You need to have a good response. So your response needs to basically have something before it happens. Understand what you're going to do before it happens. Otherwise, you're just going to be, not knowing what you're doing, and then everything falls apart. Where if you spend, 4 hours at one day to figure out what your malware response should be, it'll all go a lot more smoothly. So, automation. What do we do now? So, a lot of this is a lot of steps that take a lot of time. When I used to do this, it would take, to really get a thorough understanding, an hour or two. And that's not a very thorough understanding. That's, I understand where this thing is talking to and what it does and why I should care. So to automate that would save a lot of time. Not so much because it allows you, saving time is great and I don't want to do boring things, but it also lets you do this thousands of times. If you have a way to automate this, you can do this for every single piece of malware that you think might be interesting. Not just the ones that are, okay, this is on VP's computer, or this is on someone else's computer that you find is a high priority target. You can do this for everything. So there's two options for automation that I can sort of find that makes sense. Kind of sucks, but the first one is just doing it by hand. So I made this in 5 minutes. It is a Flask app that basically hooks into OTX, and you can just sort of hook in a lot of these. Every single supplier, vendor, software piece that I talked about here has an API that you're able to utilize. And so if you're cheap or a student or just doing this in your spare time, this is a great way to do it. Some of the APIs suck, I will tell you that from personal experience, and the documentation matches in no way what it actually does, but eventually you'll get it to work, and it will be okay. Not great, but okay. With OTX, it's actually nice they have a Python library, so you just straight up run some OTX commands, and it pulls stuff down. And so you can link this up and say, okay, if I drop in a file here, I want to run that through my Cuckoo instance and then pull out all of the IPs and then run those against OTX, and then you can link all of these together. And then now you're just dropping a file onto a web page and getting all the results back saying, here's every single place it contacted, here's any other malware related to it. And then from there, you can make a much more informed decision. The next option is Phantom. I don't know if anyone knows what Phantom is, but it's basically a way to create playbooks. It does have a free version. It's sort of like a freeware type situation where you can have like 5 active cases and 100 actions per day, which if you're just playing around with stuff is fine. If you're doing more enterprise type level stuff, you're going to need to pay for it. But it gives you a really slick interface to design playbooks. And it's not just limited to malware. Again, this is an awful picture. No one can understand what this says. But basically what you do is like drag and drop, super simple. So you kind of go from the start. You take in a file. It can ingest in a couple of different ways. You can have it ingest directly from a SIM. So say anytime ArcSight creates an incident or an event, load it in here. Or you can say, I want to send this over a REST API. So if you want to do it manually, you can. You can also do stuff over Ceph, the Common Event Framework format, whatever it is. So it hooks into basically anything that is probably been written in the last 10 years. And what you can do with that is it links in, I think, with like a couple hundred different applications. It's all security related, so that's a great bonus because a lot of the other options I looked at are not. So it's kind of like if this then that, but for security things. So basically, what you can say is I want to pull the file reputation from VirusTotal, and if it's a certain amount, do this. And if it's like if it's really bad, you want to detonate the file. So that would be, okay, I want to throw this in Joe Sandbox. I want to throw this in my Cuckoo instance. And then you can go step by step from there. So you're basically creating a decision tree for all of your systems to go through, coordinated through Phantom. And I believe the next one shows this. It's probably a bit easier to see for most people. You can have, so for example here, this has file reputation. This has 2 different blocks. It's a bit easier to see. So this one, for example, disables users. So if it's something that is particularly bad, you can say, hey, I want to lock this person off. This is detected, WannaCry or not Petya or something. I want to shut their system down right now because this is something that it's worthwhile to just say, okay, shut everything down. We'll deal with this later. And you can include, I don't think this shows it, but it actually does have sort of an incident handling aspect to it where you're able to say, do this, then this, then this, and then wait for some input. So you can have someone say, okay, right before you disable, log off, shut down the system, and block the hash, I want someone with eyes on the system to verify that that makes sense. I want to make sure that we're not accidentally blocking Google because this malware is using the Google compute cloud to do its command and control. You want to make sure you're not blocking Amazon if they're using AWS. Okay, now we've blocked every single AWS site down like the East Coast in that region. Oops, now no one can access like anything. But you can also do it automated. If it's something that is so specific, with WannaCry, there's some very specific indicators with that. You could have built this out in a few minutes after all that went and done this sort of playbook without any sort of interaction. And then you can create tickets that hooks into a whole bunch of ticketing systems and things like that. But it basically allows you to take your malware analysis steps that, you decide what you care about, what decisions you'd make, and then formalize it. It all comes up in like Python code too. So it is it's very targeted towards security people and people who are very technical. So you're able to sort of put what you want down on paper, and you can even just run these all manually. So if you just want to say, hey, instead of doing this manual thing where I'm creating a web server, and putting stuff in there and having the information come out. You create a playbook, and then you drop in a file. It processes everything, gives you the results, and then you can do that what you want. It all depends on, if you have lots of manpower, the more control you give to people, probably the better. If you're one guy in, a 5,000 employee company doing security, you're probably just going to automate this, and then when it fails, say, hey, give me more money to hire some people. If we had eyes on this, what would have happened? So that is my talk. One thing I forgot to put a slide at the end there. Blank slide. I will leave it for now. One thing I did want to say is that if there's anyone in here who does any sort of front-end stuff, I have been trying to make something like Phantom, but I suck at front-end stuff, and it looks awful, and no one will ever use it. So if you do anything like that, reach out to me. I have a lot of the back-end stuff done. So if that's something you're interested in and want to play around with, talk with me. I'm going to be here the rest of today and tomorrow. And I ran through that really quickly because I know we've been running short on time today. So if anyone has any questions, we can do that. But if not... Oh, Jesus. Well, I will look into that. But I assume that's probably a really good idea. Oh, okay. Does that do what I basically just talked about? Oh, okay. See, this is what he was talking about earlier with, as soon as you do the talk, someone steals it. Yeah. So ignore what I said and do that thing. Probably. Anything else? Yes, Josh? Yes, but you can do your own. So basically, when you do the drag and drop sort of stuff, it creates Python functions. And basically, if you have a conditional, it creates a framework, plops it in there, and it's very straightforward. So you do that, and then if you need any sort of extra stuff in there, you can add it in yourself. Yeah. So there's a whole ton of stuff in there. You can about every single source in there, it connects to firewalls and stuff. So you can even say, hey, if we connect to this more than 1% of our stuff, you can do that definitely. It also hooks into a whole bunch of threat intel feeds. So I'm sure there's some on there that you could say, hey, if whoever lists this as a verified good domain, don't block it. Send that off for review. If it's something that's unknown, you can even do conditionals like, hey, was this registered in the last week? Okay, if this was registered in the last week, that's definitely, okay, we don't care. Even if this is legitimate, there's going to be one person using it, and this is their site, and they can contact us. So, anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.